Hogan Assessments just dropped research that proves what we've all suspected. The people getting promoted into leadership and the people employees want to work for, two completely different set of traits. Imagine that. Download their free global report at hogan.to/I hate it here. This is The Leadership Divide, a special podcast series with Hogan Assessments in partnership with I Hate It Here. I'm Hiba Youssef, and we're on episode 3 of 4 in this series. Last episode, Jocelyn left us with an uncomfortable question. If the dark side of leadership doesn't show up until after someone's in the role, how did they get there in the first place? And today we're going to answer that, and it's a little spicy because the research keeps showing the same thing, that traits organizations reward when they crown their high potentials often aren't the traits that predict whether someone can actually build and keep a high-performing team. We tend to promote the loudest, most confident, the person who's great at the current job, which, plot twist, is completely different than actually leading. We reward performance, call it potential, and then wonder why it falls apart. To dig into that today, I'm joined by Jackie Sahm. Jackie is the VP of Integrated Solutions at Hogan, where she leads efforts to provide comprehensive, seamless, and tailored solutions, manages intellectual property, and more. She has more than 15 years of experience in assessments, talent management, and leadership development. So she's watched this go right and also go very, very wrong. Jackie, welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much, Hiba. It's so wonderful to meet you.
I know, I'm having such a good time talking to everyone at Hogan, honestly. And I took the assessment, and Jocelyn and I got into it, and we talked about some things, and I was like, ooh, I'm a little uncomfy. No, I'm just kidding. She kept me so at ease. I'm like very self-aware about my flaws. And she was like, yeah, I could tell. It's clear. I'm reading your assessment. And she kind of gave me some interesting truths. But I also shared my assessment results with my direct report. And my direct report was like, oh, this is spot on.
This is
and
you.
I was like, oh God. And she's worked with me for 4 years. So 4 years, and it's been so interesting. But I left us on a cliffhanger last episode. So let's start with some words because I think we all use them wrong. Performance versus potential. What's the actual difference and why does it matter so much?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question and one we sometimes overlook. So performance is a snapshot in time, which is typically anchored in either the present tense or the past tense, right? So it often is backward looking in the sense that we capture what has this person already done? What accomplishments do they have in the job that they currently reside in? So what's important about that is it's really context anchored to, this boss, this team, this function, right? It's a very context anchored set of observations about how is this person performing. Potential is a prediction or forecast about what might this person do, what might they be capable of in the next job, a job they have never held that is hypothetical in nature and often a completely different kind of job and or operating at a different altitude or level. The one thing I would say that sits behind the surface of this is performance is not, we don't measure performance particularly well at leadership levels. So I think there's a third question about what does it actually mean when we're talking about performance at this nebulous, kind of squishy level of particularly around executive leadership?
Yeah, I would concur we don't measure it well at the leadership level. I've just worked with a lot of different leaders over the years. I've sat on multiple executive teams, and it is just honestly I'm so thankful. I'm curious because I just kind of sit there and sometimes observe leadership teams. And I really feel like I've lasered in over the years on what would make someone successful in that role and what wouldn't. But that difference between performance and potential is so interesting to me because people always think they can predict potential. And usually I'm like, oh, I don't think so. I don't think a lot of us are actually good at that part.
Yes.
And then
that's a big disconnect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But then it makes me think okay, if I don't think people are actually good at predicting potential, when an organization says someone is then high potential, what are they
Hmm.
usually actually measuring? And potentially, like, what are they overlooking? Like, what should we be looking for instead?
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I think I have to start with an assumption, one of my assumptions, which is that I think all of this is generally speaking done with positive intent. So what I'm about to say is may sound like a bit of an indictment of organizations and the people making these decisions about hypos. And I believe that that's fair. However, I don't think it's ill intentioned. So with that as kind of in the back of your mind, I think on our best days, organizations are trying to measure or predict is really the better term, predict who will thrive in bigger roles and different assignments. So that's the honest intent. But what they usually capture is something far more contaminated with lots of different sources of bias and noise. A lot of times what we are actually getting at are these performative qualities of leader like behaviors like visibility and confidence and polish, and even in some cases, proximity to power or relationships. So often we're measuring who impresses us the most with their platform skills, which often has either very little to do with leadership or, in fact, can degrade leadership capabilities. But I think it's such a common trap because that person who walks in the room and gets very easily noticed and has that polish, we have these implicit assumptions that this is a person who won't embarrass me in an executive room full of people, right? Or room full of executives. But it may or may not translate to those actual real leadership skills. And I think, what we should be measuring instead is more about that substance. So we sometimes talk about that person's, all sizzle and no steak, right? We want to get at the substance of the
Yeah.
leader. And the most, I don't know, troubling part about this pattern is that the leaders that have those high visibility qualities often tend to score higher on our measures of things like arrogance and emotional volatility and tendency to manipulate others. So unfortunately, our radar is quite off.
Yeah. It's so like I will just tell you some of the biggest, I don't want to say fights because that makes it sound like I'm doing a lot of conflict in the workplace, but some of like the biggest, most contentious discussions I've gotten into are with leaders who are like, this person is high potential. And then I'm like, well, tell me why. And when they
Hmm.
start telling me why and we start unraveling it, it turns out most often a lot of times that leader sees themselves in that person they're identifying as high potential. And they start to think, well, if I'm successful, this person will be too. And it ends up being like a very interesting conversation that does tend to get contentious because you are asking people to defend why it is they believe that. And that can get like really tricky really fast.
Yes, and you have gotten right at the heart of the issue right there. So when people hear the word potential, their sub or unconscious interpretation of that word, so I don't think they know they're doing this, but it is who is the most similar to me. So you're right. Leaders tend to hire others in their image, whether they want to or not. It is this pretty human and super pervasive cognitive bias that we all have. But when we put people in these positions of power and no one is challenging them anymore. So kudos to you for asking the question and having them show their work. Because I don't, in my experience, is that that's not always even done. But it's super critical. Show your work. How are you arriving at this conclusion? And I'll be honest, Heba, I've been in these talent calibration rooms and I've
Yeah.
sat in the talent review as the consultant. And sometimes the answer is they just have caliber or they just have what it takes. I just know it when I see it. Those are right. Those are red flags for I don't actually
Yeah.
know. I can't explain my decision or why the reason why I feel gravitated toward this person, but beneath the surface, it's exactly what you just said. They remind me an awful lot of me.
Mm. It's so interesting because it's making me think of two things. The first, I have been really good about not hiring people like me, mostly
Hmm.
because I know I need someone to balance me. And I've been
Hmm.
really blessed in my career to date where I inherited a lot of people that balance me perfectly. So then when I start recruiting and adding more people to the team, I'm always looking for, where am I weak that someone can compliment me? Like I am like a
Hmm.
very big picture dreamer. I need somebody who can execute work at like I can go down to that execution level, but a lot of times that's not my sweet spot. My sweet spot is like actively dreaming, thinking, being strategic, coming up with new ideas. And when I have to be in the execution spot, I don't love it, but I do it. And so I constantly look for, who can I get to compliment me? And then it makes it interesting when I think about promotions as well, because I'm like, they're not like, the whole point is not to build a team in my image. Honestly, I think I will have failed spectacularly as a leader if I'm in a room where everyone looks like me, thinks like me, executes work like me. And so like that has just been a really big learning moment for me when I'm thinking about like high potential people. Is it's always alarm bells for me when a leader says, but they're just like me and I'm successful. I'm like, that's worst outcome. Worst outcome is we build a team of people who are exactly alike, because how is the work going to become innovative, get done differently, be inclusive? Like, how would that even happen? And
Yes.
my second thought on this, and honestly, I forgot where my second thought was going. This always happens. This is why I keep a journal to like write things down, because I'm like, I have good ideas and I need to remember them. But it that part I had to call out, because it is like really hard when you're in those conversations to have like that friction with a leader who, you're not trying to tell them they're a bad leader, but you're also trying to tell them like, we don't want to only have high potential people that are just like you. I did
Right.
remember my second thought. It was the
Yeah.
intuition piece that you called out, where, a lot of leaders, like, we as HR do not get to roll into conversations and say, our intuition tells us so and so is a flight risk, and our intuition tells us so and so is going to be a top performer. Even though I do think HR people of all executives probably have a better and stronger intuition, because we've seen the patterns time and time again and somewhat start to predict it, but we don't get to show up in conversations like that. And so when I'm coaching leaders on how they're thinking about high potential, and when they do the intuition, well, my gut tells me they'd be so good at this.
Hmm.
I'm always like, no, no, we do not promote people based on gut. We promote people based on data. That's how we keep things
Hmm.
equitable. That's how we make sure we have a structure that can grow and thrive with us. So let's break it down. And I feel like that also caused a lot of friction for me early in my career. What really
Yes.
irritated me, that like I didn't get to use my intuition as a data point, and I don't want leaders to also use their intuition as a data point. That was my second
Yeah.
thought.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you've called out a few things there. First of all, the ability, the awareness and the maturity, I think maturity enters into the equation here around intentionally selecting others who challenge you, who are different from you, who maybe even help cover your gaps or have your back on certain things. That's an evolved skill. It's an evolved maturity
Oh my
level, and
God,
that's
thank you.
wonderful.
I'm
And some
trying.
people have it, some people don't. But you mentioned something else there. You pivoted a little when you talked about, when I'm thinking about promotions, and succession is a particularly sensitive kind of promotion decision. So I think that's where sometimes even leaders who are evolved and who are trying to recruit diversity onto their team, when they flip that switch and start thinking about, but who's going to replace me? The brilliant, amazing, wonderful me. That is a harder and more emotional
Mm,
task, I think, for leaders, where they have a harder time cleanly separating out, the data from their intuition or their feeling. So I do think when we're talking about talent calibration and high potential identification, where it's less about building the team that you need and more about identifying the bench of successors that we have in this organization, that's where I think we see things start to really deconstruct. Um,
And that gap is the one I
yeah.
keep hearing about, and we like keep touching upon in the series. Like, what gets rewarded in the talent process, in that promotion process, versus what actually predicts leadership effectiveness. There is a gap there. And y'all's research has shown that. Like, lay out that gap for us so people listening are like well aware of what that gap looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are so many different sources of evidence for this observation that you're referring to. One comes from research we just put out around the leaders we have versus the leaders that we want and need. So the design of this study was deceptively simple. We asked 10,000 employees from every continent around the world, in which people work, what do you want and need in your leaders? And they gave us their answers. And then we looked at our very robust database of real executives and looked at what kind of characteristics and competencies do they typically tend to have. And what we found when we isolated the top 5 in each group, we found zero overlap. Zero. Not close, not almost there, zero. And it's shocking, right? When I see you, you have your head in your hands right now.
I'm
And
like,
that
ugh.
is, it's terrible, right? And when you hold that up against the state of engagement worldwide, right, we can start to see some patterns emerge. The best of our, not just our research, but when we look across other fields and within our own field who are studying this phenomenon of effective leadership or lack thereof, the base rate by our best estimate is somewhere in the ballpark of 2/3 to 3/4 of leaders are basically incompetent at the most fundamental job of leadership, which is inspiring followers, making people want to come play for you. And that tracks almost one to one with engagement levels around the world and with our own research about our hit rate is not, it's not great by all measures.
I sorry, I was writing that down because I'm so baffled by that. But actually, no, that's a lie. I'm not baffled by that because like very few. It's interesting. We ask a question in our performance reviews we run reviews twice a year. Um, we ask a question: Who in this org has inspired you? And it's
Yeah.
been really interesting seeing the responses to that. We actually like compile them and then send them to the employee directly so they know they're being inspired. And for a while, we like observed this trend where like people were just picking their managers. So then we did like one cycle where we said, don't pick your manager. And then people were still like, but my manager does inspire me. And I was like, what we have built here is like very special and interesting. And then to hear you say that like 2/3 of people are incompetent at inspiring their followers is so mind boggling to me in the current environment I'm in. Cause I feel like I work with like very inspirational people, but I will tell you at the average org I've worked at, you're right. I'm not looking at my CHRO and being like, wow, they really make me want to like live a better life and work harder. It's this disconnect too that's very fascinating because I'm sure, I don't know, leadership comes with its own set of like egos. And I think part of that is also like, I'm sure there are a lot of leaders out there who believe they truly are inspirational, but then only to
Yes,
hear you all did the research and employees are saying that's not the case is very
so much.
interesting to me.
Well, yeah, and it has a lot to do with how people spend their time. So I think at lower levels of leadership. So I don't know what you're referring, you have in mind when you're thinking about this practice, which is beautiful, by the way. Taking the time to ask people who
Who
inspires you
inspires you?
and why would be my follow-on question. And I ask that question actually a lot of people. Think about the best boss you ever had. What made them stand out? What made them special? And think about the worst boss you've ever had and why was it so challenging to work for them? And the answers are amazing. But but back to the point, um, we find that the leaders who are assessed as effective and inspirational, the way they budget their time is they spend most of it with their team doing the invisible work of real leadership. Most of what happens that matters in leadership is done when nobody is watching, right? When you're not on stage, you're not giving a performance, you are engaging in a relationship with an individual or a group of people. And you are trying to find how do I get the most out of this group of people? How do I maximize the natural potential that they all have? And how do I inspire them to outperform even their own expectations of self? Right? That all of that happens in the dark, right? In the quiet places. The performative acts of leadership that we tend to gravitate towards in our identification of hypos or successors is all the stuff that happens in the light. It happens on stage. And it tracks with what we found that there's amazing study about how managers spent their time, and the ones who are deemed ineffective or more emergent, meaning they spend all of their time managing their own careers instead of their team, that they invest their time in politicking and self promotion and activities that are really not at all about the team. They're about oneself. And I think that's just a really important thing that we as talent managers and people that are in the room and maybe not able to influence the system completely, but we're in the room, we're hearing those conversations and drawing attention to that fact that leadership is actually kind of a quiet act.
Yeah, it's like the performance piece of it, it just gives me the ick. And I think it gives
Hmm.
everyone across the internet the ick because that is it has been the common commentary about leadership in the last few years since COVID and the rise of social media and really people leveraging like TikTok to tell more stories about work. Is a lot of those stories are about that performative style leader who says I care about you and then does everything to sabotage your work. It's so interesting because like if I pull up and I think not just about the people but the system itself seems very flawed. Like that gap that you all studied was persistent across like industry and companies. So if our system itself is flawed, like why doesn't it get fixed?
Right. Yes. And let's double click on that because to your point, the results were universal. So not only were they consistent across industry and country, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's mind blowing.
Literally mind blowing.
Right. It crossed boundaries of generation and all of the normal demographics. You would think, okay, if we cut it this way and that way, we might see important differences emerge. No, not only did we not see differences in the kinds of leaders we tend to promote, we also didn't find differences in what people want out of their leaders, which suggests something that runs really deep, right? If when something crosses cultural boundaries and age and generational related boundaries and gender boundaries, you know you have something that's evergreen and something that is held very maybe even deeply in our biology, right? We know what a great leader looks like as a from a follower's perspective because once upon a time our survival depended on it, right? We had to be able to identify a great leader because if we didn't, our tribe wouldn't survive.
They led
You
us
know,
into wars, right? Like we had to
yeah,
follow them into a war. We had to follow them into like, yeah, we had to know what a great leader
exactly.
was back then.
Exactly. And although our society and how we spend our time has changed extremely rapidly over the last, few hundred years, our biology can't change that fast, right? Our evolution, I think, still anchors us to this humble, uh, democratic leader who is interested in the good of the group and not interested in oneself. And that is the contrast, right? So a lot of times, what I feel like we are confusing is success with effectiveness. So yes, objectively, the executives that you work with every day, that we work with every day, objectively, they are successful. They have arrived, right? They've been promoted many times. They have the title and the crown, but that does not mean they actually have what it takes to lead others. It means they are amazing at managing their own careers. Now, that back to that study where we looked at the leaders who kind of emerge and are great politicians and leaders who are effective. If you think about the Venn diagram, there is a little tiny sliver of overlap, and it's about 10%. So 10% of leaders can do both, where they are visible and can self promote and also are investing the time in their team. That's a pretty slim margin.
Ha- That's tiny. Like I'm thinking about would I even say I'm good at both of those things? I'm more of a team person. I'd rather spend time I don't know, with my team. It's interesting. Like I used to tell my direct reports, like my indication for success is that you are even better than me at everything I do. Like if I
Yeah.
can teach you everything I know and then you're even better than me at it, that means I have been successful as a leader. And I feel like I've always been that leader. And people always ask like, what's your leadership style? Servant leader, this, that. And I'm like, I've thought less about that and more about who I want to be to these people that I am managing. And I have grown to become like close friends with direct reports to the point where like someone I used to manage is literally one of my best friends now and she has my old job. Like it's a very interesting dynamic. But I think that like idea of spending time with your team and self promoting is just so interesting to me because we can see it so clearly in HR. Like we are one of our biggest gripes is with leadership. Like whenever I'm with my HR friends, like the first thing that comes up is like this leader, this CEO, my CFO, this head of sales that's driving me nuts. And it's interesting that I can see it so clearly. And obviously, like our teams do too. And that gap is like really felt across the board. Like I do feel like we're in like a leadership crisis where what we want kind of looks very different than what we're getting.
I agree. And I've noticed something both with you and your body language throughout our session today, and also
Mhm.
when we've been presenting these results of our research around the world. I've started referring to our leadership divide report and the underlying research as the study that should have shocked the world and didn't, because your head's in your hands. You're like, this is just so terrible and disappointing. And at the same time, exactly what I expected because it's what I'm seeing every day. So your point about in HR, we see these problems perhaps more intimately than anyone else. So you recognize the problem, the crisis that we have with leadership. So it's so funny. This study is at equal parts astonishing and not at the exact
Yeah.
same time.
Surprised, but not. I mean, okay, I need to talk about this real quick because it absolutely sent me. Hogan Assessments compared personality data from over 21,000 executives against what nearly 10,000 employees across 25 different markets want from a leader. When they looked at the top 5 competencies of current executives versus the top 5 competencies employees are begging for, guess what they found? That there's zero overlap. I wish I was joking. Hogan has the world's largest database of personality research, and they used it to create a free global report called The Leadership Divide. It quantifies the gap so you can finally stop explaining it in every skip level you've ever had. Download it at hogan.to/I hate it here. Our work through HR only gets a lot of our work gets enabled through the leaders. Like I could
Hmm.
build the most perfect system. I could build the most perfect workflow. I could build the most perfect experience. But most of my work is enabled through that leadership and manager level. And the second it goes through them and it fails, I know it's going to fail if I have those leaders that can't connect the dots, that can't do the storytelling, that can't show up in difficult conversations, that can't be empathetic and show compassion to what the people are dealing with. Like I know my thing is going to fail. So I think in HR, like this problem, we feel it 10x. Like, yes, managers directly impact the employees day to day, but all of my work has to flow through that layer a lot of times. And that's where the problems usually come up is when I'm trying to flow it through a leader who doesn't know how to deliver a message effectively, who can't tell an employee they're not getting a raise and then says, well, HR told me I can't give it to you.
Hmm.
So like that's why the study, I think to like a lot of people listening to this, they're going to feel so seen because it's a problem we deal with every day in HR. And then we have to hear from the employees who come to us. And remember, like sometimes we're in the middle between a leader and an employee. And I tell everybody like there are two sides to every story. A leader is going to
Hmm.
tell you they did everything to make someone successful. The employee is going to say, I got none of that feedback or coaching. And the reality is usually somewhere in the middle.
Somewhere in the middle.
So we're also coaching through this problem too. So like all of this data doesn't surprise me because I feel it in real friction all day long and also makes me think like what can we actually do to make this better? So when I think about that, I'm thinking about our processes. What does a talent process look like when it's actually built to predict effectiveness instead of
Mhm.
that like visibility confidence thing?
Yeah. Well, one thing that universally helps, and I think the answer to that might depend a lot on what level of talent assessment maturity is the organization at currently. So, and we have to think about things like organizational size and shape and things like
Yeah.
that. So, at
Yeah,
a startup, it might look very different than it does at a Fortune 500 enterprise.
for sure.
But regardless, what is evergreen, what always helps is data. And having more data that we feel confident is meaningful, which we have a lot of data that is not meaningful or it's meaningful in the wrong direction,
So
right? So
true.
we,
So
yeah.
true.
So for example, supervisor ratings at the leadership level or line manager ratings, I should say, of the talent we're talking about at leadership and executive levels is nearly meaningless. And in many cases, tells us a lot more about the rater than it tells us about the person being rated. So we
Interesting.
find number one, very little of the variance in actual leadership performance or effectiveness, it can be explained by their supervisor's ratings. So we already know accuracy extremely low. But second on that, to make matters worse, the supervisor rating effects appear to be very idiosyncratic, meaning it's based on this dyad of this individual line manager and the leader they're evaluating. So there's so much noise in those data, and it's kind of like, uh, imagine we're trying to predict. Imagine that potential is the weather, right? And we're trying to predict the weather, but we don't have sophisticated instruments to do that yet, right? And humans did this for hundreds of years, thousands of years. And they could watch signals and start to notice patterns about, well, when it feels temperature drop suddenly, then these weather conditions might happen, right? So we're doing that too. We are observing signals. But then let's imagine we invented the thermometer. We're like, hey, look at this. We can actually take temperatures. But when the supervisor is holding it up, it turns out they're actually taking the temperature of their own palm. That's kind of like what supervisor ratings are like. So it appears to be a measurement and it appears to be a data point that we should look at, but in fact, it is self-referential. It's a self-defeating data point, if that makes sense. But
No, it
th-
absolutely does.
yeah, that aside, knowing what we know about the challenges with supervisor ratings of leader performance, other data points in the room matter a great deal. And any data is better than no data. If we're living in a process where these decisions are mostly made on gut feel and personal preference and subjective evaluations like this person has caliber, please operationalize caliber for me, anybody. I don't,
Yeah,
this doesn't mean anything.
it doesn't mean anything.
That's always going to help. But if I can just be candid, and I don't want this to sound like an ivory tower judgment on HR people, because I speak about this problem from within the problem, right? I don't stand above it looking down. I have lived alongside you. I have fought the same battles that I feel our HR and talent management practitioners are battling, and these problems are hard. The system is broken. And if it was easy to fix, it would be fixed already. So this comes not from a place of judgment, but in reality, to really answer your question, we work with some of the world's best organizations. I don't know that I've ever seen what really good looks like. I've seen organizations who are several cuts above average in the way that they are trying to be disciplined about how they use data and more objective and more fair and balanced. And those efforts are not easily won. They're hard fought, hard won, and they are making a difference. But I've seen close to good. I don't know if I've ever seen great. And and I think that speaks to how hairy this problem is that we have.
It's definitely a very pervasive problem. Like, I can't tell you a single person. I'm thinking of all my friends in my head or all the people I know in HR that would say they have the best leaders or the best tools for picking the next set of leaders. I think we're all constantly sifting through the bias that comes at work, unconscious or conscious, and what environments promote and want to give people promotions for versus like what they should be doing it. Like, I think this is one of the hairiest interpersonal dynamics problem too, like where you are trying to coach a manager and a leader to understand what high potential looks like, then also build a system that coaches them through it and also filters through that. It feels like a really hard one. And I think you've given a lot of really good tips for how to think about it. And people listening are probably walking away with like a million things to think about in their environment. But it I know it's a big problem to solve, but for someone who's listening who might not own this problem or even their promotion system, but wants to take one step, wants to do something to make it better, where do you think the highest leverage place to start would be?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think this is such an important question because we can observe the challenges and still not have the power, right, to upend the whole system, right?
Oh, yeah.
I do think you said something earlier that is part. It speaks to one of my recommendations for the highest leverage place to start, which is if you find yourself in that room, if you have a seat at the table in any way, shape, or form, asking those questions about how did you get there? Show your work. What does caliber mean? And leaning on some of the skills I think HR and talent management people tend to be more naturally skilled at, or at least trained in, is facilitation skill, ensuring that
Yeah.
every voice in the room gets heard. Because I can tell you, having been in that room as an outsider many times, I can tell you that it never fails. The name that sails through as one of the highest potential people, based on the data I have access to, is often the person I would least want to work for or would never voluntarily work for based on the
My
information I have
God.
access to. And sometimes that's a leader getting results, but they're getting results at a very high cost to people or other. I have also seen names sail through where there have been objections raised or dissenting voices from people who are more junior in the organization. So they don't have a seat of superior authority at the table, but they were courageous and brave and they use their voice to say, I hear that you all are liking this particular candidate or successor, but I would urge you to consider these things. And experience has taught me that we need to listen to those voices of dissent. So when I say facilitation skill, I mean making sure we draw out the best of what everyone knows and the experiences they have, the information that they have had access to. And in one example that I'll never be able to forget, this happened and this voice was dismissed, as was mine. There was a lot of data suggesting that this leader was probably a pretty good, what I call fair weather leader. So when the weather is great,
Yep.
everything's fine. That leader is capable. Crisis, this person was not put
Don't
in a
call
crisis, and they were blaming. They were volatile. They would conceal mistakes from their line manager. They were abusive, so kind of kiss up, kick down profile, if you will. And this person ended up on the news a few years later. They did, in fact, put them in this much bigger job, and they were responsible for a big. Um, I can't say. I'm trying to not reveal the client, but
for
they
sure.
ended up very, very much in the news. And
And that's a big
what?
fear of
Yeah, go
ours.
ahead.
Well, no, I was
Yeah.
just going to say that's my worst nightmare. Like,
Hmm.
what do you mean I let somebody get promoted to a role that then caused us to be in a bad situation? That's like
Hmm.
my worst outcome, where I'm just like, we should be having those conversations. Those voices of dissent have to be heard because there's probably a reason they are dissenting. Like, there's no way around it. And it's very hard.
Yeah. And in this case, I mean, the person who dissented had worked for this leader, and so they had seen that invisible part of leadership and
Yeah.
knew about this was a very challenging assignment this person would be put into. We knew that the conditions were going to be tough, and this person had insight that others in the room didn't have. And I think that's worst nightmare territory, to your point. What I think is actually the more insidious problem, so that's a false positive, right? We identified someone who was not right for the job. I think the more insidious problem is all the people we pass over who could have been great because they don't look or walk or talk exactly the way we expect them to with our implicit theories of leadership. And those examples are harder to point to because they fly right under our radar. But occasionally I catch glimpses of them. So same client organization, there was this person who was passed over almost instantly. And it was the person that I wanted to work for based on the data. Their engagement scores were through the
Yeah.
roof. They were brilliant. They were um, incredibly resourceful and had this entrepreneurial style, which was challenging in this non-entrepreneurial culture, kind of a very long-standing organization. This person was passed over one too many times and went out, founded his own startup. And I just saw the other day, sold for $6 billion. So
Hell
Unfortunately for
yeah.
us as our organizations, that's a loss. That's a that's potential we didn't capitalize on. And that I feel like is actually the higher cost problem that is incredibly challenging to fix. So the voices of dissent are important in both directions. If there is someone who um, gets dismissed quickly as the
Mm.
HR person in the room, I would make sure that we really dig into that. And if there's an advocate in the room for that person, let's listen. What do they have to say? I think anytime we can rely on voices that represent the led, right, the people following, the more balanced our evaluations can be. So I guess that's a very long-winded way of saying if you're the HR leader in the room doing what you suggested earlier, Heba, around asking good questions, show me what data you're using to make that judgment call. And maybe even if you can gain permission to do this, or if this is culturally acceptable at your firm, saying, can I ask you to play devil's advocate? Can we do a little role playing where we don't just follow the majority opinion of the most senior person here in this room, but we actually do a little bit of a deeper dive by asking people to role play, even if they support the candidate, let's hear the case against them anyway, just to make sure that we've considered alternatives here.
I love that. Those are all really good areas to get started. Like I'm always nitpicking about leadership decisions because
Yeah.
I'm in, like, I've gotten to where I've gotten in my career, and I think
Hmm.
part of the responsibility I feel to have gotten this far in my career is to also build the bench of like incredible talent and to also make sure that leaders are showing up the best that they possibly can. And so leadership
Hmm.
decisions are ones that I am very involved in and have a lot of commentary on. And I feel really grateful I work with a CEO who's willing to listen to my commentary because
Hmm.
he and I are very similar, like personality wise. I think if he took the Hogan assessment, I would be disturbed to see us not be very aligned in a lot of areas. But I also think we counterbalance each other because he gives me the space to say, okay, let's play this out if it goes wrong. Okay, here's the thing I saw that maybe you didn't see. And it really leads to like just such robust conversations. And I feel really grateful to have. So I mean, like,
Yes.
I think just getting to the spot and the trust where you can show that your judgment is strong and be able to ask those questions, I think then positions the HR person to really start making some moves that could create incredible value in their organization and potentially stop the wrong people from being promoted and get the right people on
Yeah.
the track. So I'm with you.
Absolutely. Yeah,
We've,
that's productive conflict that comes from just real honesty. When you can spar with your CEO and other stakeholders in the room, that's incredibly productive tension there. And I guess a question maybe then for you, one thing I think we could do, but I don't see done very often, and I know it's hard and I know some of the reasons why it's hard, but going back and examining our hit rates, right? Do we ever look back and say, okay, we placed these leaders, how did we do?
You're speaking to my soul, Jackie, because I'm so sick where I always want an I told you so moment. I'm actively working on it. Okay. Everyone listening to this podcast who's listened to me for seasons, I am working on my I told you so. It's a youngish child, stubborn younger sister thing where I always want to be right. And I'm actively working on, letting go when I'm not. And then maybe celebrating the moments quietly when I know I am. I'm always going back to those points, which is like I
Amazing.
keep a detailed log of like, here's where we got. If we make a decision that's like different, if we make an important decision, it's always documented. If we make a decision and it's against my recommendation, I always
Yeah,
also write in like kind of my decision memo or like the area where I'm keeping my notes, like, I did not like this decision was against my recommendation. My recommendation was XYZ. And so when we're in those situations, we do a really good job of like, let's
that's
do a
great.
quick retro on what we thought and how it worked out. And like that also
Yes,
keeps us moving. And then we reference those learned moments. Again, I'm lucky my CEO is a teacher. He was a former teacher. So he is very much like of the learning mindset. It's a core value of ours. So when we get to a situation where we've learned from something, he will say, oh, we learned that that didn't work last time we did that. Or we saw we did that last time. It didn't work. We're actually going to do the opposite this time because we tried it and it didn't work. So I have that environment already, but the recommendation I give all HR people is like, you are allowed to have your I told you so moments. Just document the things that got you there and make sure that you do a retro so you can bring it up in a way that feels less I told you so and more let's do a holistic look back on what we learned. But
Hmm.
I'm working on it's a stubborn characteristic of mine, Jackie. I'm working on it.
I love that though. I hope that, I mean, you may have spoken about this before on your podcast, but I hope the people listening can take that idea and figure out how they might be able to implement a similar retrospective kind of analysis of how did we do? Because as humans, we typically don't evaluate our decisions in post hoc, and we really should, because we're always going to get it wrong sometimes, and sometimes it's
Hindsight's
the other way
yeah.
around, right? I advocated for someone and it didn't work out the way I thought. How do I make sure I learn, and how do I make sure that when they went against the dissenting voice or my recommendation, that we learn from that too as a group, not the private, you get the victory, I told you so, you're tracking it yourself, but you're actually doing the harder part, which is coming, bringing that forward to the executives
Yeah.
team, or at least the CEO, and talking through those challenges.
Also, you should be looking at your retention data from that viewpoint as well.
Yes.
Like, let's say you promote somebody and then all of a sudden 5 out of the 7 people on the team quit or the manager
Yes.
themselves quit. Like, that in itself, like, if you were to start anywhere after this episode, go look at like people you have recently promoted to manager roles and the retention on their team of the last year or 6 months. If they have people fleeing, like, that is a clear sign something is not right there.
Exactly. And if I could build on that, I agree wholeheartedly. That would solve so many things if we just looked at what was the impact this person left behind them.
Yep.
But there is often a bit of a time lag there. So one thing that we don't do often, and it's hard to do, so I always admit it's hard. These are things are not easy, but looking at impact over time. So sometimes the damage that an executive or a leader does is not seen until 12, 18 months later. And if we looked at their track record over time, not just for their time in the role, but what happened after they left that role? If a leader leaves a post and things deconstruct in the wake, after they leave, that can mean different things and have different sources, but it may tell us that this leader, is not always leaving things better than they found them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
But like,
think getting more disciplined about that would be transformative.
we're definitely going to talk about it in the next episode. So Allison's joining me in the last conclusion episode of the series, where we're going to talk about like what it costs to get things right, like either the price tag, the human, the financial piece of it all. So we're going to get to that. But before we wrap up this episode, I've been asking every guest that's appeared the kind of like the same through line question. What's one thing organizations keep getting wrong about how they choose and develop their leaders? And
Hmm.
what would it look like to actually get it right?
Yeah.
And a loaded question. You and I have been talking about it the whole episode, but I've been asking everybody as a wrap up to the episode, like, what do you think it is? What do we keep getting
Yeah.
wrong?
I think what we are mostly getting wrong is we are looking for leadership in the wrong places. We are looking for it in the light, right? In the behavior that we see on the stage, and that's very public and visible. And we are trusting the opinions and voices of people who actually have very little opportunities to observe that person lead, to do the actual act of leading. Where leadership happens, so to reiterate something we talked about earlier, it's in the dark. It's in these quiet places where no one's watching what you're doing. And what I would add to that we haven't talked about is, if we were to make the follower feedback consequential, and their evaluation of leadership consequential in some way, we might be able to really move that needle faster than you might expect. There's a line I love that's, people do what you inspect, not what you expect. So if all we inspect and all we use to calibrate our decisions about talent are these things we see in the light and on the stage, then
Yeah.
that's what we will optimize for. And I think in a lot of ways, the leadership crisis we are in is a function of our own making, because
Oh,
the
yeah.
the people who are in those roles now are survivors of a system that we engineered. So unless we can change what gets rewarded and what is viewed as where we are looking to see evidence of leadership, I don't think we're going to move the needle very much. So I think if we were to act on some of the advice we've talked about throughout, we would see a completely different world. Even if we could move the needle 10%, 15%, 20% placement of better leaders who can actually lead, the quality of life in organizations would improve dramatically. Engagement scores would recover. Production would go through the roof because I think because we to be honest, we've never actually seen what that looks like. It's hard to even imagine, but I think it would be a completely different world if we placed leaders who were inspiring and could get the most out of people. I mean, don't you? Doesn't
Yeah.
it excite you to think about that
You're
world?
genuinely speaking my language because I actually wrote down exactly the sentence you said. There were survivors of it. The leaders now are survivors of a system we engineered. And it's a common struggle point of mine. The reason I started I Hate It Here was because I felt like these environments were getting out of hand, where people were not building good companies. And I think this idea of a great company is like genuinely fiction because every great company has a bad story within it. And I think you're right. If we move the needle 10% on these leaders, we found the people who could handle the pace of change right now, who could handle how unstable things are, who could instill confidence through inspiration in their direct reports and their entire team, like maybe work would look different for people. And I think like we're just not happy as a like engagement is so low. We're not happy as a society with work. And it's like, okay, we've all agreed we have to work to keep society going. That is the system we operate in. Now, does it have to be awful? No. And who can directly impact that? It's your leader and your manager. And like that change could be life changing for someone. And I mean, like I've had toxic bosses and I've had great bosses, and I know the difference of how I feel about showing up to work every day. I know the difference in my work product. And I do believe, like, I am a believer on we can have great leaders, and that can dramatically reshape what our experience with work is.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Oh my God,
Um,
Jackie, this has been so fun. Sorry, what were you going to
it's
say?
been so fun. Well, I was just going to say, as a word of encouragement, I think the problem can feel so big that there's a lot of learned helplessness in our profession, self
Yes.
included. I mean, sometimes it feels
Yeah.
so hard to move the needle. But my encouragement is I do think very, very small changes in the right direction can create a watershed event in the future. So I think it's important we don't, uh, we take the
Scare people.
time to make the little tiny change or a tiny habit that produces something, even just the tiniest move in the right direction, because those accumulate. It is the pressure built up over centuries that causes the tectonic plates to suddenly move. And I think we can start building that tension and it still helps. That's still really productive.
Yeah.
All it takes is a spark for us to move in a
I
different
love that.
direction.
I've been working with my CEO for 4 years, and there's a lot I think I have taught him that he would say. But my most proud moments are when he shows up and he does something the way I would have told him how to do that. And in the
Yeah.
past, I know that wasn't the case. And I'm
Yeah.
just like filled with so immense pride. And it was like a little step here and there. It was him being receptive to it, right? Like him wanting to be a great leader, yes, was the baseline. But then I was able to give him these like little tweaks. And now when he shows up, I'm just like, so he was already a great leader, but I'm just like immensely proud of when he makes a decision that it exactly the decision I would instruct him to make when it comes to like the people stuff. I sometimes take a little bit of credit in my head where I'm like, oh, he did that because I
Sure.
told him about that. Ooh, he made that move because he knows that this is the thing that would happen if he didn't. And it is those little steps that I think can build that insane momentum where it's been four
Totally.
years and now we're in lockstep on so many things to the point where, I mean, like we maybe have like one disagreement every few months now. In the past, like in the beginning, we had a lot and I had to learn him, he had to learn me, but I think he always had the aptitude to be a great leader and wanted to actively be one, that he was receptive to me giving those like little tips, little steps, and look at how far
Mhm.
he's evolved. So I think
Yeah.
like there's so much power HR has. that it can go and influence in pockets. And eventually, those little moments of influence will build into something so much bigger.
Yes, and celebrate those victories. What a little victory there when you see those moments.
It's a
And
cupcake moment for me.
celebrating victories allows us to sustain effort, and the effort's hard. And, continuing to feel it sometimes maybe feel like you're beating your head against a wall if you don't have a great CEO that you're working with. But when you do, celebrate, take those moments to see that you're really impacting change.
I've had bad, I've had good, and let me just tell you, my life is so much better when you have good.
Yeah, for sure.
It makes your job a lot easier to have a good one. And
Yeah.
and I say it with so much empathy for anyone who is dealing with a bad CEO. I have been there. My line is open to you. I will answer
Yeah.
any DM you send me. I will give advice because I have been there, and it really made my life miserable and honestly like made me deconstruct. I had to like do active recovery after that experience to build myself back up because it made me doubt all of my abilities. And that's not okay. So Jackie and I are here to support you all in whatever way you need. Like there is a dark side of leadership. We hopefully touched on a lot of it today. And we have the next part of the series, which is our conclusion coming up next. And Jackie, I'm so honored. I was just geeking this whole episode with you, but I'm
Me
so
too.
honored we got time to spend together. And I've learned so much in like the last hour, and I took a lot of notes. Like I'm ready to go deal with some leaders.
Amazing.
For people who want to get in touch with you, what's the best way they can reach you?
They can reach us through our Hogan social pages. We are active on LinkedIn. I am as well, so they can reach me. I'm Jackie Sahm, and I have a outrageously long maiden name that's in the middle there, Jackie Van Broekhoven Sahm. So that's me. And yeah, I would love to interact with you. I do think, to your point, how about you said you have an open line. I do think when we talk to each other about these issues, we learn from each other, we pick up little tips and tricks, and we're all better for it. So I do hope people will reach out. And thank you so much for having me. I've been a fan and a follower, and it's just so wonderful to meet you and get to spend this time. This is the
This
best part of my
was
week.
this was the best part of my week. I'm having so much fun. I can't wait. Can't wait to do more. Can't wait to talk to Allison next. But thank you so much, Jackie, for making time for me today.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.